For 8 years, I've lived by the sea, in a house built with love and buried with lies. My name is Rowan Pierce, and this is the place where my wife died bringing our son into the world. Some say the ocean heals all wounds. I've learned it only echoes them back. The mornings at Whispering Tide House begin the same way. The hum of waves against the cliffs, the cry of gulls circling the dunes, and the silence that fills what used to be laughter. The air still carries her, Elena, in the scent of salt and roses. She planted the white rosebush the spring before she died. I've kept it alive ever since, though sometimes I wonder if it's keeping me instead. My son, Eli, was born with eyes that see only shadow and light. Doctors said his nerves were perfect, his brain untouched. A mystery, they called it. They ran their tests and went home to their families, leaving me with the question no one could answer. Why? We live quietly now. I draw plans I'll never build. I walk the shore. I water Elena's garden. Our only company is Martha Marin, the old gardener who once worked for Elena's family, and her granddaughter Sophie, a bright-haired, barefoot child who talks to the sea as if it listens. That morning, the wind carried spring's first warmth. I was in my studio sketching lines that led nowhere when I heard Sophie's voice through the open window. "Mr. Pierce, something shiny in the dirt." I stepped outside, brushing dust from my hands. She was kneeling near the rose bush, mud streaked on her dress, small fingers digging into the damp soil. Her hair shimmered in the sunlight like gold against the white petals. Martha hurried after her, breathless. "Sophie, what did I tell you about playing by the cliff?" But Sophie didn't move. Her hand had struck something. A dull, metallic sound echoed through the roots. She looked up at me, eyes wide. "I think it's a box," she whispered. I knelt beside her, helping clear the earth. The soil gave way to a small music box, its silver tarnished and cracked. My heart stopped when I saw the name etched faintly on its lid. Elena. Martha's face turned pale. She took a step back. "That can't be," she murmured. "That was buried years ago." I lifted the box carefully. The hinge resisted, then gave a soft click. The melody sputtered once, a ghost of a tune before dying completely. Inside, something fluttered. A folded scrap of paper, yellowed and damp. Eli's voice called from the porch. "Dad, what's that sound?" I couldn't answer. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. The ink had bled, but 3 words were still clear, written in Elena's delicate hand. Words that shouldn't exist 8 years after her death. "Help me, please." The garden went silent. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Martha pressed a hand to her chest, whispering a prayer under her breath. Sophie, curious and unafraid, leaned closer. "What does it mean, Mr. Pierce?" I looked toward the sea, the horizon blurring in the sunlight. I remembered the day we buried her. How the tide came in early. How Celeste Vaughn stood beside me with her perfect calm, saying some things were God's will. But this was not God's handwriting. I turned the box over again. Beneath the lining, something rattled. A second compartment, sealed with rust. My pulse quickened. I told Sophie to fetch Martha, but my voice barely reached. I was already on my knees, clawing at the lock, the wind tearing through the garden. 8 years of silence. And the sea had just spoken back. The box was still cold when I carried it into my studio, the scent of earth clinging to the metal. I placed it on my drafting table beside the half-finished sketches of houses I'd never build. The sea wind drifted through the open window, tugging at the papers, whispering like it knew what I was about to find. I pried open the rusted compartment beneath the lining. Inside was something wrapped in faded blue fabric, soft as a forgotten promise. I unfolded it carefully. Beneath the cloth lay a small journal, its cover swollen with moisture, the edges browned with age. My breath caught when I saw her handwriting on the first page. Elena Pierce. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. My hands trembled the way they had the day she died. But curiosity and dread are twins. One always drags the other along. I opened to the first entry, May 4th. The garden's nearly finished. Rowan says the house finally feels alive. We named it Whispering Tide, because the ocean never stops talking to us. He laughs when I say it's listening back. I could almost hear her voice, light, unguarded. The sound of her laughter filled the room again, for just a breath. Further down the page, her words shifted. Lately, I've felt dizzy. Adrian says it's normal. He gave me new vitamins, but they taste strange, metallic. When I asked, he smiled too quickly. Dr. Adrian Kessler, the man who delivered my son. The man who told me Elena's death was a complication. I turned another page. Celeste stopped by from the foundation today. She says I worry too much, that I should rest. But every time she visits, I feel worse afterward. I can't tell if it's her perfume or her presence that makes me sick. Celeste Vaughn, my wife's friend, my benefactor, the woman who handled all the hospital arrangements when I could barely breathe. The waves outside crashed hard against the rocks. The rhythm felt angry. Or maybe it was my heartbeat. As I read, the entries grew darker, scattered with smudges and tear stains. If something happens, I want Rowan to know. I love him. And I'm scared of what's in those bottles. I closed the book and sat back, staring at the walls of my studio. The blueprints around me, homes I'd designed, lives I'd imagined, all looked hollow now. The truth had been buried right outside my window, beneath the roses she planted. The ocean murmured through the glass. Every sound felt like a question. That night I couldn't sleep. The words replayed in my head. Vitamins, Celeste, Adrian. My mind chased them in circles until dawn. When I finally rose, the house smelled of coffee and salt. In the garden, Sophie was with Eli again. She had a seashell pressed to his hand, guiding his fingers along its ridges. "The sea isn't blue, Eli," she said softly. "It's silver, like your mom's locket." He tilted his face toward her voice, smiling faintly. "Silver? I thought it was blue." "Only when it wants to be," she giggled. I stood at the window watching them, a blind boy seeing through another child's eyes. Two small souls who didn't yet understand how cruel the world could be. For the first time in years, I heard laughter at Whispering Tide House. Not from the past, from now. Sophie's voice floated up again. "Mr. Pierce, do roses like the sea air?" "They do," I called back. "They just need a little care and courage to keep blooming." But my voice faltered at the last word. Because as the tide rolled in and the wind picked up, I realized Elena had been trying to warn me, and whatever poisoned her might still be waiting for us in this house by the sea. The nights grew longer after I found her journal. I stopped drawing, stopped sleeping. Every hour that passed, I found myself back at my desk, turning the fragile pages beneath the yellow lamplight. The ocean outside whispered in the dark, not a comfort now, but a witness. Each entry drew me closer to a truth I wasn't ready for. August 3rd. The new prescription made me dizzy again. Kessler insists it's normal. Celeste called afterward. She always calls after my appointments. She asked if I took them. She sounded pleased. I could almost hear her voice trembling in those lines. My Elena, trusting, gentle, unaware of how deeply the knives around her had already been planted. Further down the page, the handwriting faltered, rushed. I found notes on my file today. The dosage has changed, my signature forged. Kessler visits even when Rowan isn't home. He says Celeste approved it. Why would she care about my medication? The ink trailed off into a smear, as if the pen had slipped from her fingers. Then, the words that stopped my breath. If anything happens to me, Rowan must know. Hide this under the rosebush we planted by the sea. I pushed the journal away, chest tight. 8 years of grief, and I had buried her without ever knowing she'd buried the truth. The lamp flickered. I remembered that day, Celeste in white, standing beside me at the hospital as the monitors went still. I'd been too numb to question her calm, her assurances that some things can't be prevented. She'd arranged the funeral, the paperwork, even handled the medical files that I never saw again. Now I knew why. The wind slammed against the shutters, and somewhere in the house, a door creaked open. For a moment I imagined her, Elena, standing in the hallway watching me. Maybe she'd been waiting for this night, for me to finally listen. By dawn, I'd read every page. By sunrise, I couldn't unsee what she'd written. That morning, I walked down to the garden. Martha was pruning the rosebush, her gloved hands steady despite her age. She looked up when she saw me. "You're up early," she said. "I've been reading something," I replied, my voice hoarse. "Something Elena left behind." Her clippers stilled. "Her journal?" I nodded. "You knew about it." Martha's eyes flickered, guilt and memory crossing her face. She took off her gloves slowly, folding them in her lap. "Your wife came to me that morning," she said quietly, "before you drove her to the hospital. She was pale, trembling. She told me, if anything happened, I was to protect what she'd hidden under the rose bush." My throat closed. "And you didn't?" "I wanted to," she whispered. But Celeste came by that same afternoon asking questions. She knew something was buried here. I thought if I stayed quiet, she'd stop looking. Her voice broke. I was wrong. I stared at the rosebush, the white petals trembling in the sea breeze, the earth below it freshly disturbed. "She knew," I said, more to myself than to her. "Elena knew she was being poisoned." Martha's hand found my arm. "Sometimes people sense when the end is near. She wanted to protect you." I shook my head. "No, she wanted me to finish what she couldn't." Behind us, the waves crashed hard against the cliffs, louder than usual, as if something deep beneath the tide had stirred. For years, I thought grief was silence. Now I understood. It had just been waiting for me to hear what it was trying to say. The morning I decided to face her, the sea was calm, deceptively calm, like it knew something was about to break. For 8 years, I'd avoided the hospital that took my wife and returned only silence. But I wasn't the same man who left it. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was hunting. Dr. Celeste Vaughn now ran the place. The Whitmore Coastal Foundation, the brochures called it. Pictures of her lined the entrance hall. Celeste shaking hands, cutting ribbons, smiling beside children in wheelchairs. The city called her the Angel of the Outer Banks. I stepped into her office, and there she was, poised, immaculate, wrapped in white. The same color she'd worn the day Elena died. "Rowan Pierce," she said, rising from behind her desk. "It's been so long. What brings you back?" Her voice was silk. Her eyes, glass. "I've been reviewing some old records," I said carefully. "Elena's case files. There are things I don't understand." She tilted her head, sympathy painted perfectly across her face. "It's been 8 years, Rowan. Grief plays tricks on memory." Then she smiled, reaching for a pendant at her neck, a silver locket. For a moment, my blood froze. "It was identical to Elena's. Where did you get that?" I asked before I could stop myself. "This?" she said lightly, letting it fall against her blouse. "A gift. From an old friend." The words hit harder than any confession. She offered coffee, small talk, her eyes assessing every flicker in mine. I forced myself to stay calm, to thank her, to leave. But as I walked through the lobby, the mask I'd worn cracked. When I reached home, I tore through the old storage boxes in my study, medical forms, discharge summaries, bills. The ink on some pages was faint, but one thing stood out: the signatures. Elena's name written after her death, and beneath them, Celeste Vaughn's initials. Curving in that same elegant hand, the realization hit like a riptide. That night, Sophie sat at the kitchen table, drawing seashells while I copied the signatures onto tracing paper. Her voice broke my trance. "She writes her name funny," Sophie said. "Like she's trying to be someone else." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Sophie shrugged. "When people write their names, they press hard. Hers looks scared." She returned to her coloring, unaware that she had just said the most important thing I'd heard in years. I stared at the forged pages, the soft loops and hesitant pressure. It wasn't the writing of a confident doctor, and it was the writing of someone living a lie. That night, I set up a small camera on the bookshelf in my studio. Nothing elaborate, just enough to catch a face, a voice, a truth. The next morning I called Celeste. I told her I needed financial help for Eli's new treatment, that I wanted her advice. Her tone softened instantly. "Of course, Rowan. Anything for your family." She came that afternoon, still dressed in white, still perfect. She toured the house, praised the roses Elena had planted, spoke about destiny and healing. The camera blinked quietly from its corner. Every visit that followed revealed a little more. Her arrogance, her control, her delight in manipulation. She never once mentioned regret. But there was something else too, a flicker of unease, the faint awareness that I was no longer the broken man she'd once consoled. The tide outside rose higher each day, and with every recording, every lie preserved on film, I could feel it turning in my favor. The woman in white didn't know it yet, but the sea she'd buried us beneath was about to give everything back. She came back on a Sunday, the kind of day that tricks you into thinking peace still exists. The wind was gentle, the sea breathing slow against the cliffs. I'd spent the morning preparing the house, not with fear, but with purpose. Everything was in its place. The tea set Elena once used, the journal resting on the table, the small camera blinking red behind the books. When Celeste Vaughn arrived, dressed again in her immaculate white, I almost admired her composure. "Almost, Rowan," she said with a warm smile, stepping inside as if she still belonged there. I was worried after our last conversation. "You sounded unsettled." "I've been reading," I said, pouring the tea. "Old notes, old records. It's strange how paper can outlast people." She took the cup, her hands perfectly still. "Sometimes paper lies." "Sometimes it doesn't," I replied. Her eyes narrowed slightly, studying me the way a doctor studies a patient's pulse. "You found something, didn't you?" I looked up at her, not angry, not afraid, just tired. "Just the truth you buried." She froze, and for the first time since the hospital 8 years ago, her mask slipped. "Why don't we take a walk?" I suggested. "It's a good day for the garden." We stepped out to the back terrace, the ocean stretching wide and cold beyond the roses. The white rosebush trembled in the salt wind, petals scattering like falling snow. "I never understood why she loved this place so much," Celeste murmured. "Always said the sea made her feel alive." I suppose it was fitting that it took her in the end. "It wasn't the sea that took her," I said quietly. She turned. "Excuse me?" I pointed to the table near the window, the open diary, the faded ink, Elena's words. "If anything happens to me, Rowan must know." Celeste's expression hardened. "You think those scribbles mean anything?" She was delirious. "Dying women imagine monsters." I stepped closer. "She imagined your signature on her medical orders. Or the drugs Kessler prescribed with your approval?" Her cup shook slightly before she set it down. "Do you think anyone will believe you?" She hissed. "You signed every document. You made me untouchable." The wind rose, catching the edge of her hair, and for the first time I saw what she really was. Not composed, not powerful, just terrified of being seen. "Maybe not everyone," I said. "But the right people already have this recording." Her face blanched. Her eyes darted to the bookshelf inside, the faint red light winking through the glass. "You wouldn't," she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The garden went still save for the whisper of waves below. She looked around, at the roses, the house, the cliffs, as if realizing she'd never leave this place the same. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a thread. "You'll destroy everything." "No," I said, stepping past her toward the house. "I'm rebuilding it." I turned off the camera. 3 days later, Detective Paul Hensley arrived with a warrant. His expression was grim but resolute. I led him to the study, where the files and recordings lay neatly on the desk. Celeste didn't fight. She stood in the doorway as the officers cuffed her hands, still wearing white, still trying to look untouchable. No shouting. No begging, just the sound of the ocean through the open window. As they led her away, she glanced once at the rosebush, a faint tremor in her jaw, the ghost of fear. I didn't follow her. I simply closed the door and poured another cup of tea. Elena used to say that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits for someone brave enough to open the door. And today, truth finally walked out of mine. The house felt different after Celeste was taken. For the first time in years, the air inside Whispering Tide didn't feel heavy. The walls seemed to breathe again, but justice, I learned, doesn't heal everything. It only clears the fog so you can see what still needs mending. My son was the next truth waiting to be faced. The investigation spread fast after Celeste's arrest. Files opened, testimonies followed, and then came Dr. Adrian Kessler, the man who delivered Eli, the man who told me my wife's heart had failed. Under questioning, he broke quickly. He admitted to using an unapproved stabilizer during Elena's pregnancy, a compound meant to strengthen fetal growth, still under research. He'd done it at Celeste's request for data and funding, not care. It caused a chemical reaction in the optic nerves, leaving Eli blind from birth. When I heard it, I felt nothing at first. Just an empty ache, like the tide pulling back after a storm. Then anger followed, but not the kind that burns, the kind that freezes. A week later, I sat in a hospital room in Norfolk, surrounded by doctors offering something I'd stopped believing in: hope. They wanted to begin an experimental therapy, a chance, however small, to restore part of Eli's vision. They spoke carefully, measuring their words, but I could hear what they didn't say. "We owe you this." Through it all, Eli stayed calm, too calm for a boy his age. But whenever I faltered, Sophie was there. That little girl who once dug truth out of the dirt, now sat by his side every single day. She described the world to him, not as it looked, but as it felt. "The sea isn't just silver, Eli," she'd say softly, tracing waves in his palm. "It's warm and cold at the same time. It moves like breathing." He'd smile. "You sound like my mom." One afternoon, as I stepped into the room, I caught her whispering something, her voice trembling with hope. "When you can finally see," she said, "I hope I'm the first thing you look at." He reached out, finding her hand. "I already do." I had to turn away before they saw the tears. While Eli's world slowly opened, another one began to close. Martha had fallen ill. The doctors called it heart failure, but I think it was guilt, finally wearing her down. I found her sitting by the window one night, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The sunset poured through the glass, painting her face gold and fragile. "I never told you how sorry I am," she said. "Your wife came to me that morning. She begged me to protect what she'd hidden, and I did nothing." Her voice cracked. "I thought silence kept us safe. But silence only feeds the wrong people." I sat beside her, taking her hand, the same hand that had planted those roses with Elena so many years ago. "You broke that silence, Martha," I said. "That's what matters," she smiled faintly. "Then maybe I can rest." The wind outside shifted, carrying the scent of the ocean through the house. For a moment, I imagined Elena standing behind us, her hand resting gently on Martha's shoulder, forgiveness passing quietly between them. When I left her room, I stopped by Eli's door. Sophie was reading aloud, her small voice filling the dim light. He was smiling, head tilted toward her as if listening to something only he could hear. And in that moment I realized, this house wasn't haunted anymore. It was healing, not through revenge, but through the innocence of two children who still believed the world could be beautiful again. It was late spring when I realized time had begun to move differently. Not forward, not backward, but upward. Like the tide rising slowly toward light, Eli's treatment had stretched into months. The doctors in Norfolk spoke carefully, refusing to promise what science couldn't guarantee. "It's about patience," they said. "Progress comes in shadows first." So we waited. Every week I sat by his bedside as machines hummed softly, their rhythm syncing with the ocean outside the window. Sophie was always there, her hair catching the afternoon sun, describing the colors of the day. "The light's golden today," she'd say. "Like honey," Eli would smile faintly. "Then it must be warm." It was a golden afternoon when it happened. He'd been quiet through most of the therapy, his face calm behind the gauze that covered his eyes. Then, without warning, his fingers twitched. He blinked once, twice. The bandages trembled slightly as he turned toward me. "Dad?" His voice was cautious, almost afraid of the answer. I set down the book I'd been pretending to read. "I'm here, son." He squinted, blinking again. His breathing hitched. "You're..." Taller than I imagined. For a moment, the world stopped. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. "The doctors said something. I don't remember what." All I could hear was the boy who had never seen a face now seeing mine. I reached for his hand, and for the first time he didn't reach by sound. He looked. The tears came before I could stop them. Not loud, not desperate, just quiet, unshakable release. He laughed softly. "You're crying." "I am," I said, "and I'm not ashamed of it." Later that night, when he was asleep, I sat alone in the small room the hospital had given me, the same journal open on my lap. There was one page I had never read, the final one. Elena's handwriting had grown weaker near the end. The ink faded, but steady. "If our son ever sees the sea, tell him it was love that kept him alive, not medicine." The words blurred as I read them. Not from age, from the tears that fell onto the page. I thought about everything that had happened. The lies, the poison, the justice. I had believed vengeance was the end of the story, that exposing the truth would be the closure I needed. But Elena had known better. She hadn't written about anger or fear. She had written about love. Outside, the sea murmured against the shore. Through the hospital window, I could see the faint outline of the horizon glowing silver under the moonlight. Somewhere in another wing, Eli stirred in his sleep, whispering softly, "Mom." I closed the journal and pressed my hand against its cover. For years I'd carried the weight of her death like an anchor. Now I realized it had always been a compass. The next morning, when the nurses opened the blinds, sunlight flooded the room. Eli blinked at the brightness and turned toward the window, his eyes wide. "What color is that?" he asked. "It's the sea," I said. He smiled, really smiled, and I could swear the light on his face looked exactly like hers. I knew then that vengeance was never the destination. It was just the road we take until we remember where home really is, and for the first time in 8 years, I felt home again. The roses bloomed early that year. I remember stepping out into the morning light and seeing the white petals scattered across the grass like snow that refused to melt. The air was heavy with salt and memory. The same scent that had once meant grief, now softened into something gentler. Months had passed since Norfolk. Eli's recovery had been slow, cautious, and nothing short of miraculous. He could see shapes now, outlines, colors when the light hit just right. He carried his cane still, more out of habit than need, and wore a pair of dark-lensed glasses that reflected the world like calm water. Martha had recovered too. Her strength surprised everyone, though I think it wasn't the medicine that healed her. It was confession. Guilt, when spoken, loses its power. She spent her mornings humming by the window, hands deep in the soil, pruning the roses she once feared to touch. And Sophie. She'd grown taller, louder, her laughter filling the air like wind chimes. She ran across the yard that afternoon, chasing the sea breeze, calling Eli to follow. "Come on, the tide's pulling back." Eli smiled, tapping his way across the grass. He moved slower, but surer with every step. When he reached the rosebush, he stopped. His hand brushed the petals, the same bush where his mother's secret had slept beneath the earth for 8 long years. He knelt beside it, the ocean behind him shimmering gold. I stood a few feet away, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the stillness of what was unfolding. "Mom," he whispered, voice trembling with wonder. "I can see the ocean now." The world went quiet. Even the waves seemed to pause. I felt the air leave my chest, the ache of joy cutting deeper than any pain I'd known. He reached forward, his fingers tracing the light, and for the first time I saw not the boy who'd been wronged, but the young man he was becoming, one who carried both her strength and her peace. Sophie ran back toward me, her curls flying in the wind. She stopped at my side, small hand slipping into mine. "She did it, didn't she?" she said softly. I nodded. "Yes, she did." We stood watching as Eli turned his face toward the horizon, the sunlight painting his outline in silver. Sophie looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Does this mean I can call you Dad now?" I turned to her, smiling through the sting in my eyes. "Yes, sweetheart." "I think you already do," she smiled wide, leaning against my arm. And just like that, the silence that had once haunted Whispering Tide House became something holy. The sun dipped lower, its reflection stretching across the water, long and golden, like a path leading somewhere better. Martha called from the porch, her voice steady again. The kettle whistled behind her, and for a moment, the house by the sea felt alive in every room. As the light faded, I looked out over the cliffs, the same cliffs where my story began, where I'd buried truth beneath roses and tears. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd found, and the words came naturally, carried by the wind, meant not for anyone else but for her. For years I thought justice was about punishment. Now I know. Justice is truth being seen, and sometimes love is what finally opens our eyes. The waves answered softly against the shore, and I closed my eyes, letting their rhythm carry me. For the first time, the sea didn't sound like morning. It sounded like home.